Welcome to another Fireside chat. Grab your favorite beverage as we talk with Daniel Scott-Raynsford about AI development. It's a changing space, and there's a lot to learn and adapt to. That almost seems just being in tech, like with the adoption of mobile phones over landlines, emails over fax, cloud over on premises, and now generative AI assistants over traditional forms of development. So, welcome, DSR. Do you want to introduce yourself, a bit about yourself, and then we'll just get straight into it about how AI assistance, like particularly in GitHub Copilot, helps, like, has changed your day-to-day development practices or those of your team. It could be work or even personal projects, but tell us more about yourself and
Cool.
how you use AI.
Thanks, Luke, for inviting me, and thanks for hopefully listening in. And yeah, I'm Dan. I get called DSR. Everyone at Microsoft has to have a acronym, I think. So I'm a partner solution architect at Microsoft, working across AI. But I was a software dev for 15 years, and then I did moved into infrastructure as code and DevOps, and sort of moved my way through architecture and ended up at Microsoft about 6 years ago. So, um, yeah, I still love to code though. I go home and enjoy coding, and so I'm finding this era
I
of
think
AI
I
coding just
think I know
amazing.
you from like the desired state configuration days back in, like, when it was a cool
That
thing. But
when it was, I don't think Luke, it was never a cool thing. DSC, for those infrastructure as code, it was never a cool thing, but it was actually, yeah, it was a great community and a great product, great tool.
mm,
I was lucky enough to spend and learn a lot of good techniques from the PowerShell team who were fostering that product, and it was actually such a good. They were so supportive of the community. That was actually interesting enough. In the DSE product was the first thing that Microsoft open sourced.
oh
Um,
wow,
and it
yep.
was the first time Microsoft put something on GitHub and open sourced it and said, right, community. That's that's just going shows how far back that goes, right? Now
Mm,
Microsoft, everything's open source. Well, so much is it open source.
yeah, it almost seems weird if it's not in some
Yeah,
in some respect. Yeah, especially the stuff
yeah,
coming out of the incubations team as well. But yeah,
yeah.
so, like, you do a lot of software development, coding. Obviously, you know about GitHub Copilot. So, how has it changed the way that you might have developed 5 years ago to today?
So that's a really good. I mean, in my role, I don't get a lot of opportunity to sit down and work on a single code base. I'm not
Hmm.
producing a product generally that I have to, work on over several months or sprints or even years, like I did. So I have to move between languages. I have to move between, code bases really quickly. I have to often produce either open source or solution accelerators, or just put together samples that I can, show someone as a solution. And I don't necessarily have the time to get deep into the nuances of any particular language. So I find tools like GitHub Copilot and AI coding really allow me to get started really quickly and get something stood up and get something proved and demonstrated really, really easily. And then it also allows me to spend a bit more time crafting it, and I can look at it and say, okay, I don't necessarily know the nuances of every part of this framework or this language or this SDK, but I know what is good design and good architecture,
Mm.
and that I can use, coding, use GitHub Copilot agents to really um, help me fashion that code, or help me, make sure it's meeting all the principles like solid, you know, uh, all good sort of, gang of four design patterns. I can go and have a discussion with the agent about whether I should use a repository pattern or a strategy pattern here, or combine them, and all these sorts of different higher level things that I would never have had time to do before because I was too busy trying to figure out what the basics of that particular SDK did. So now I get to spend so much more time producing a really high quality, really polished piece of code or sample or solution accelerator that I can give to a partner or a customer. So I really like that, and I don't think I could do what I did without the ability to do that now. In fact, I wouldn't want to go back to the past where I didn't have an agent. I don't really think about it. How did we code?
Yeah. I think you touched really on a point there, and it's more around you already know a lot of the frameworks like dry and solid and all sorts of other things, but if you didn't, could you use, like, this is always a loaded question, but if you didn't know that, would you still want to use GitHub Copilot? Like, could would you rely on that
That's a
to
really good
teach you
question.
the architecture? Like, one of the recent changes is MCP support for Microsoft Docs, Learn Docs, which is great because, from my perspective, as someone who I know architects Azure solutions as an example, the docs bring in a whole lot of up to date cloud patterns as well. So, like, yeah, it's there's an element
That
there of where, yeah,
that's a really, I mean, that is a really good question, and I think that's a challenge we sort of struggle for. It sort of speaks to the how do you get the knowledge to know what to ask for in the first place?
yeah,
Where does that come from? And that obviously comes from experience. But how do you get the experience if you're just getting Copilot to do
mm,
everything? And I think that's a real key. Um, a really key discussion point that I think every senior engineer, every engineering manager, every HR person, every learning, skilling person has to really think deeply about and say, how are we making sure that our developers or our future developers, our junior developers are all getting the understanding of these good design practices and patterns. They're learning what questions to ask. And I think that's key. When we start to use GitHub Copilot and any AI coding tool, we go write some code to do a thing. We don't really ask, it would say, well, we really want it to use this. It's going to have 10,000 users. It's going to need to work. We need to have these security concerns, and I want to use it. We don't even answer those questions. Even senior engineers often don't. So what we need is to put together a set of really, or get our teams, our leaders to put together these sets of robust prompts or starter places we can say that says, I need to make sure that I answer these 10 questions or talk to the AI about these 10 topics and get feedback and learn something. Every time I write a piece of code,
mm,
I shouldn't be trying to write the code. I should be trying to write the code and learn that's something else about it, learn a better way. So whenever I get AI to write something for me, I then go through and I have I love chat modes in Azure and GitHub Copilot agents, right? You can create a custom chat mode, which allows you to override the behavior of the agent. I have a custom chat mode I created called Confirm My Thinking. And it does not, in one of the first things in the chat mode, so the chat mode has a bunch of rules that I write and says,
yeah,
do this and do that. I say, your job is to never answer the user. Your job is to only confirm that what the user says is actually what the code does. So I then go back and say, right, I'm going to explain to you what this has done. And I'm going to explain to you how it works. And then the Copilot, the agent's job is to say, yes, you've understood correctly. You correctly understand this code. Because if I can't understand it, then how do I know it's safe? How do I know it's scalable? How do I know all these other things? So I use that. And then I also have a prompt that will look at a piece of code and say, here's 10 questions you should ask yourself about this or this approach, this infrastructure, this architecture. And those 10 things might be related to security or scalability or design patterns, and I will then re-ask that question back to the agent, say, what should I, and it would be something like, what should I, what would I worry about what might break if I have 10,000 users hitting this a second? Where is things going to go wrong? Or what is you know, is this design pattern as testable as I'd like it to be? Is in 6 months' time, as I've written this, evolved this product, where are things going to leak? Those sorts of questions, if we ask them, ahead of time, we're going to learn something about the code base that we probably didn't know. We're going to learn where the holes are. We're going to learn where we need to maybe refine some things, and we're going to learn we're going to start to learn those techniques. I just find just asking, is there a better design pattern that I might use here? Because by default, agents and AI will generally write things like a script. Like fairly, they're not
Yeah.
going to necessarily think too much about the structure because we didn't tell them to. They just went, well, you just want a short, quick program that's going to do the job and move on. That's not how we really write software.
No, I think there's a couple of elements of that I really like or touch on. Is one is, say for example, you're a senior engineer and you've been working on this product for 5 years, and it's been developed in a specific way, in a specific thing, like, I don't know, variables are in camel case and this in Pascal, whatever, and then like this specific version for this specific thing needs to be this because of, I don't know, legacy API requirements or something. I'm just making something up, but I think the fact is, as someone who worked on that, that would be in my head, and then I would go on, move to another company, or
Mm-hmm.
go and drive a truck, and all of a sudden that information is lost. But then the fact that you can develop these prompts, you can share them, you can improve them, actually starts to become a tool that someone else can accelerate on
Mm.
and kind of understand why things are. So they become almost a living design architecture decision doc. Like,
Yeah, I know what you mean. So, I mean, because that's the cool thing about the custom prompts is they are like natural language descriptions of an actual process. We can write them at prompt as just a doer thing, but you find the best prompts are the ones that, have come up with a list of things, how you're going to do that first, and then step through the approach and think about this. And yeah, you're right. That becomes, then you check that into the repo, and then someone comes along, 5 years later and goes, well, how do we write new features? Oh, well, here's the feature development prompt that says, the first thing you've got to do is come up with a specification for the feature, and come up with the requirements, and we'll produce a requirements and ADR and architecture design doc or something like that, and we stick that in the repo, and then we work through that. That's the cool thing about prompts. You can do all this stuff that you could never do before. You'd have to write code, and it'll be very, very complicated and difficult. You spend more time writing the code to make the process work than just being able to just sit down and natural language define a engineering process, right? That's how all the AVM stuff I wrote works.
yeah, I know teams like, well, because for the people listening in, like, you might be thinking, well, that's a prompt that's sitting in a Git repo, and you need to manage the life cycle of that, right? But I think it's a lot more open than that. Like, for example, I know that the Microsoft Industry Solutions Engineering, so the ISE team, have their engineering fundamentals sort of playbook actually on a public website. So, from my perspective, and I've done this in the past, you're essentially going, grab all the information from the
Mm,
handbook that is on this public web page, and it could be internal depending on how you're set up. But it's like, you don't need to write a prompt in its own file and then maintain the life cycle of that. Actually, the guidelines for how stuff is could still be in a SharePoint document or a
yep.
public website somewhere that you actually just reference, and that is still your source of truth. So, in a way, it's actually enforcing that better behavior, because you know that the ramifications of what you're writing in the document actually will be used for years to
Mm,
come.
yeah. Yeah. I think that's such an important aspect that I think we have missed, or that over time documentation has not necessarily been maintained. It's not been as seen as so much as valuable. best practices, coding standards, all that stuff was a document you read when you were onboarded into a team, and
Mm.
then you probably forgot unless someone hassled you in a PR, code review, and they went, stop doing that, change of the style. Now these documents, all of this documentation that we didn't maintain is actually so important because the AI is going to follow it like is going to follow it so thoroughly. Well, depends on the model, but
Yeah,
mostly thoroughly. Um, and the more documentation we have and the more ways we can define this is how work gets done, the better we're set up to leverage AI because we can really scale because we've got that framework of documentation and standards and processes and everything like that. So, but typically, when I was a developer, a developer pushing to production, we'll say, you just had the time to write the code and maybe if you're lucky, write the tests, and if you're really lucky, the infrastructure as well. And the documentation would slip and all the other things would slip. Um, so you ended up with really not having that, and now I think a lot of organizations go, wow, that is now so valuable to us, but we don't have it, and we have to actually do an exercise to make sure we get our documentation in
mm,
order to for the AIs to leverage it. But the cool thing is you can get an AI to create the documentation quite easily. I mean, that's the point. I mean, I will often write some code and then go, okay, I'm going to now get AI to write a specification from that code and say, this is how that code worked at this time. Now, sure, do I need to do that? No. Does it really, it can be a bit of a challenge in that you've now got, the code is the ultimate
yeah.
source of truth, but the specification is much more human readable. And you can use that specification to maybe as a way to communicate with customers around what is the change, how does it work, et
Mm.
cetera, et cetera. So there is some, you know, there is some argument to have that additional source.
I think,
But yeah, that's cool.
yeah, I think from an infrastructure as code perspective, which is sort of a lot of my background, but it's always been that conversation, right? Why do we need an as built? Because the code is essentially a living representation of what something should be. So that essentially is the as built, and I don't necessarily disagree. However, the the generative AI capability, like I don't know GitHub Copilot as an example, actually allows us to flesh out the technical nature of that code into more of okay, give me like explain this to in a 5 year old
Mm.
like as a 5 year old, what does this actually do? Is there anything I need to be aware of? What was the latest
Yeah.
changes? So it brings a lot of that to life, but you can still, I don't necessarily need to go through and write an as built, but I could use that to assist if I actually needed to write one, if that makes any sense. But yeah.
Yeah. No, perfect sense. I think this is the cool thing is that there's no one size fits all
Mm,
approach to how you're going to work with an AI, with AI as part of your workflow. I reckon every team's going to develop their own way of working and their own needs and how they want to work as either a team or an engineer. And I think that's going to be, everyone's going to have a pool of coding agents or AI assisted agents working for them, and being able to clearly outline and define how a team wants to work to them is also not just to the developers but to the agents that almost work for the developers. That's going to be so key to getting this high degree of productivity increase that we should all be getting, right? We've got assistants now that can do all the horrible work that we don't really want to do, and we know we never have time to do. So we can now focus on the fun stuff.
yeah.
Maybe if you're a UI person, you like to do all the UI stuff. You can focus on the UI stuff.
Yeah, I could go deep into this, but I also like to think it's kind of like we wouldn't be able to use generative, and I'm not like AI existed for years and years and years, so we're just
Mm,
talking more. And in this conversation, just want to be clear, it's probably more lean towards like the transformer generative AI assistants than like vision models and all sorts of
yeah.
other capability, but I think the evolution of the cloud and the hyperscalers in general just has enabled that additional functionality and capability that we are at today to be able to run these things and
Yeah,
utilize the benefit of it from a platform perspective. So it's built upon one thing after another, which is quite cool to see.
yeah.
Um,
And I feel like because the number of technologies we have to deal with on a daily basis has increased,
yeah,
and you just don't have the time to get up to speed with everything you need. So you need this just-in-time learning and just-in-time, this tool that supports the just-in-time need of figuring it out as you go along and having the assistant. I think
yeah.
that's something I couldn't live without now, right?
Yeah, people ask me all the time. Well, people have asked me, not all the time, but people have asked me in the past of why do you need Copilot or why do you need this and this, and I think the response from a platform lens for me is usually been like, Windows Azure 2008 was released, became a lot more public in the 2010s, and then became Microsoft Azure. But you had, okay, well, here's your basic app service, and here's how you
Yep.
can run a basic VM in like some of the original.
Storage,
Yeah,
SQL, and there was like networking maybe, and that was pretty much it, right?
but the whole idea was, okay, well, from an operational lens, we don't need to feed and water this anymore. We don't need to, because essentially that's offered as a platform service, going to run the quote unquote latest version of that software. So really, from a developer or a business lens, we just needed to concentrate on the code that made our IP unique, not necessarily feeding and watering this thing. But as the years and years have grown, functionality has increased, more services offer. All of a sudden, the incentive of moving into the cloud becomes a bit harder, is because it becomes a lot more complex. And it's not to say that cloud is complex, it's just more of the value that it offers is more than potentially it was before. So it, by nature of that, and by nature of most of the services, and the rapid evolving from a security landscape to keep things up to date and keep things faster, stronger, better, naturally more complexity gets added to the system.
Yeah.
So from a consumer's lens, it's like, why would you not use some of these AI tools to help remove some of that? And yeah. Oh, sorry, my phone started to.
Yeah, that never rains. It's not Copilot now.
Yeah, but
I mean, yeah, that's the nature of our world. Complexity is increasing, and we've got to use whatever tools we can to keep up. And it shouldn't replace our skills or our capability of doing the way we think. But we do have to adjust the way we've done things and say, well, look, I know how to write unit tests. I can write unit
yeah.
tests, and I should maintain that skill, but I don't need to write every unit test.
So
Um,
this is really key actually for my next question. So we've touched on it a bit, but there's two sort of questions here. One is, how many people actually wrote unit tests to begin with? um, and probably that was kind of a joke question, but the reality is it is a lot easier to, even myself. I have written tests now where before it was like, why would you do that? Even in the PowerShell world with Pester, it's like I had trouble trying to define, do I spend the time to write those kind of tests? But now generative AI can do it, which means that my code becomes a lot easier because we can test against the tests. um,
yeah,
but junior developers. So we kind of touched a bit on, okay, well, we can rely on the information and the knowledge of senior engineers and architects based on like the playbooks or the prompts that they write. But for a new developer coming in, like, is there skills or shifts in mind mindset shifts or skills potentially that people should focus on coming into this industry at the moment? Do you think?
I think that's going to be the hard one, because you you learn a number of things when you're a junior developer. You start to learn good design patterns. You start to learn, um, what well-crafted code looks like. You just sort of start to naturally get a feel for all the things that could go wrong and how it could go wrong,
Mm,
and how to deal with, all these different constraints and requirements that and you kind of, the risk is always you don't develop those skills. But I think a really well-formed team, um, will use these tools to make space and coach the junior developers on these skills and go, look, yes, you can use AI tools, and we should be using AI tools to do this, but I want you to do these things as well. And we're going to maybe spend out the extra time, a little bit of extra time we get. We're going to work and we're going to code together. We're going to do, we're going to work more closely as a team, using prompting together, solving design pattern challenges. Those are the sorts of time, we're going to get more time to spare, because we're able to get AI to do all this toil and tech debt and deal with all the other tasks that we know we could do, but we don't have time to do. We're going to use some of that time to think deeply, and also to mentor and coach. I think that's going to be the important thing, that we actually have really, really good teams that have a really good culture, that then sit down with each other and say, look, this is the sort of question that we should ask an AI to help us answer. And we should be able to answer this, and being able to go, this is why I choose that design pattern over another. Let's argue with the AI over
yeah,
which design pattern is best. I think that's going to be really important, because you can't replace that. I think you can't replace the human to human, the completely with AI. It's good to have AI, but you need to know, what questions do I actually ask the AI in the first place. And it's great to have someone sitting down next to you, or virtually, you know, watching that senior coder actually say, what are the things I need to ask
yeah.
here.
Yeah, I think you've
Um,
used the word tool a couple of times, but actually, it's right, isn't it? It's I think there's a reason why Microsoft has chosen Copilot specifically as a name for some of these things. Even though there's Copilot for Africa, but actually, it's not a pilot. It's not a it's a tool, right? So you kind of wouldn't say it would be a crutch, but yeah, it's that goes kind of into the okay, well, from the junior perspective, it makes sense because you could learn by reading what people have written, still reading the documentation. So that doesn't change. Like, you still need to spend some time reading, understanding the code. I think mentorship hugely, like, even, you can't get anywhere, I don't think, or learn as quickly or as deeply as you without having good mentors around you to even spitball ideas from
yeah.
and learn how to craft things differently. AI doesn't remove that. So definitely, so that from a junior perspective, that makes sense. From an experienced developer, however, like they've learnt through hard yards
Mm,
about essentially, and like you spent hours on end reading books, getting burnt because that's just the nature of learning in IT, right? And probably any profession is sometimes things don't work the way that you want it to work. So you try again, you figure out what's worked, and you've kind of, I know some people might feel they've earned or like they're giving away that
mm.
that sort of experience. What
The
is
earned knowledge, the
but
earned knowledge, the hard
earn
yards, the
knowledge? Yeah. So I mean, I think obviously for experienced developers, offering mentorship is a good thing because that's the other side of the coin. But Yeah, it's. Do you have any sort of thoughts around the earned knowledge and what they should be, what experienced developers could potentially be doing with the knowledge that they've learnt and helping others, or actually using looking at it a different way? Like it's always loaded questions when it comes to me asking
Mm.
questions, and it's all your opinion as well. But I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean that's the hardest question is I guess where are things, what are things going to look like in a year's time or
Mm,
2 years' time, especially if you're a developer now, you're going, well, how do I mean, the big challenge is how are we developing junior coders with the skills that they're going to need to become senior coders, and then senior coders are going, where am I going to get my junior coders from? Because that is the big question. I think the only way we're going to solve that is by developing approaches and cultural changes to how we focus on learning and development, not software development, just development and people development. Like how do we go from a developer is just there to produce code to a developer is there, we're there to build up the developer to help them deliver value. And that, if we can change the approach to how we think of developers and how we think about what they're there to do, and we give them more space, more access to guidance and leadership and really good senior engineers and leaders to help them develop those skills. And and obviously our senior developers should be given the time to develop the skills that they need to actually mentor the junior developers. I think that's not
yeah.
just a thing that you can take for granted, right? Just because someone's got a lot of engineering experience doesn't immediately make them a great mentor a junior engineer. So I think we need to make sure they've got that space. We need to make sure they've got the resources and the support to do that, because I think we can't say AI, engineering. What an engineer does is going to change, and how exactly it's going to look in a few years' time, I'm not sure. But the capabilities and knowledge of a good engineer is still going to be critical. And so we have to change our. I think we have to change the way we learn, the way we support each other, and the way we work together. I think
Mhm.
that's going to be the key. It all comes down to culture and people. That's that's my thinking. The tech is going to do its own thing. The culture and the people have to be supported
Yeah.
to come along with
The
this.
tech always changes, right? And it has
Mm.
in many years. So yeah, it's I like that. There's a plug in there about use of community as well, in terms of
Absolutely.
actually
Yeah.
mentorship and learning. So I think the community, not only from a professional lens, but a personal lens as well. And I
Yeah. I
think this would go back to juniors and students as well as like experienced engineers of actually making use of the community that's around you. I think that's huge.
I think that's right. And I think the community tends to often caters to the professional who's already been
Mm,
there, done it, and so on the journey. And I think maybe that is whereas yourself and where we're community leaders, we should also think about how do we help provide some of that more personalized mentorship for the people who don't necessarily have support of a really great senior engineering team or senior engineer who's supporting them through this, and they can talk to look to people like yourself to say, well, how might you help me, how might you guide me? And I think that is going to be the key, is we will also have to find ways of helping reach people who don't necessarily get the time. Their day job isn't giving them the time to support them and learn these new skills. So, and also, making sure we're reaching students who are on the journey, they're at uni, whatever, and they're learning these skills. How do we make sure that we're reaching them and going, by the time you get into the workforce, things are going to look like a certain way. Who are you going to be mentored by? How are you going to develop those skills, et cetera, et cetera? So I think that's going to be that's a work in progress.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's a great call out. Um, I'll I'll just mention the one that I guess. probably is top of mind at the moment because it always comes up, and I remember it coming up when automation was a big push and DevOps was a big push mid
Still is. Come on.
2010s. Yeah, I'm sort of thinking back further, but I remember the same conversations around replacement of people and engineers. And I remember particularly like in my world coming from a sysadmin background, it was more around, okay, well, PowerShell is now a language. Automation is definitely a push. Teams are stressed because we can't, in general, just can't deliver fast enough the value that our businesses need to remain competitive. So, is automation going to replace our jobs? So that was essentially, I don't know, quote unquote back in the day. But now the conversation is actually, will AI replace our jobs? And it's, I think from my perspective, I think it in some areas yes, in other areas no, and I think that's a majority of them. It's really around how do you adapt to using those
Mm,
tools and getting the right mentorship in order
yeah.
to in order to actually use those tools efficiently, so you're
Well, I
part
wonder
of
if
the journey,
it's like sort of like it's not necessarily going to replace. It's not replacing jobs. It's replacing tasks,
tasks, that,
and
yeah.
it's us about choosing the tasks we want to get off our plate. Because you look at any software engineering team and you go, okay, so if you completed your backlog this week, well, chances are you probably didn't create, you didn't get all the sprint points done that you thought you were going to do anyway. Um, we'd love to think we could, but
Yeah,
you'll go, okay, so suddenly our backlog is empty.
we
What do you
need
think the
an
business is
agent that
going to
does
do?
proper estimation. I think that would change the world.
No agent can do that. It's the same as, yeah, no agent can do proper estimation. No, I mean, the reality is that the business should look at this as going, man, we can produce so much more value. We can do so much more now. They're going to shovel stuff onto the backlog because the reality is that no organization that's driving and delivering innovation is thinking, I just have to do these things and then that's it. My customers are all going to be happy and I never need to do anything else. It's the backlog is just going to grow. So we are going to have to be more, we're going to then be able to say, like, let's just focus on doing the things that we want to do and we think are high value, and we're going to assign these things to agents because
Mhm.
we still have to check this stuff. No engineer should be getting AI to write code and then pushing it to production. It has to be reviewed. Okay, maybe some low risk code in the future. Maybe you'll have an AI reviewer that will review low risk code. But no one wants to push code to production that is just AI. I mean, we've all seen the stories.
Yeah.
Don't give AI access to production, by the way. Don't give developers access to production. I'm just saying, don't. No one should have direct access to production. If you've got direct access to production,
Yeah,
you
it's
think
not
about
an AI, it's a people process problem.
it's
Or
exactly.
opportunity. Yeah, yeah.
But I guess that's the point. Without the knowledge and experience to say, you just don't give people access to production. That's the rule of thumb, whether they're AI or not. Um, that is a learned experience that we've learned over years. I mean, it's common knowledge in the industry. Well, it should be common knowledge in the industry.
Yeah.
Um, the the um, the reality is that we learned that the hard way, probably, or by going, oh man, I'm sure I've done stuff to production myself that I shouldn't have. Um, you know, the the question is, there's without knowing
Mm.
not to do this, you just get an AI to write some code and say, right, well, we'll get AI to update that database schema for me, not knowing that that is just not how you update database schemas. You don't get AI to just connect up to the database and update the database schema. That is not how you do things. If you don't know
Yeah.
that, that is I think that goes back to the mentorship. That goes
Yeah.
back to
Drop
the
drop tables
development of skills.
Friday is usually what I drop tables Friday. Yeah.
Yes, Yeah, exactly. And you do it all through DevOps. You push that code, you get it to write automation. Someone reviews it. There is a second set of eyes. You put safeguards in place. You do things like safe deployments. You do ring rollouts. But there's a million techniques to prevent these sorts of terrible things that can happen. But if you don't know what you don't know, that is the challenge. So I think that is all comes down to mentoring, learning, skilling, helping. What are the things you actually learn at university?
Mm,
Maybe that also needs to change.
yeah.
Learning some of these techniques that we all take for granted that you learn when you drop your first production database on a Friday afternoon after you fat fingered a script. That's something we've all learned. I think that's going to be really important.
Food for thought there, definitely, in terms of students learning for this industry. I know, like, ethical implications, there's process implications, learnings from, like, fire that people have had with, and more because we've got more resilient systems and more global systems. The danger of that is more global outages or more higher impact, but
Yeah.
actually there's a lot of learnings around, yeah, around that. Actually, I'm thinking out loud, but it's like, imagine if I was a student and I went to university and actually I was taught about the well architected framework, the trade offs between security versus performance or observability and cost. That's the things that actually, if we go back to how solutions are architected, it's frameworks like that I think actually they should be
Mm.
almost part
Well,
of computer science or just computers in general. And
maybe they are.
yeah,
Maybe I think it's maybe we're
they
making
could
an
be.
assumption.
Yeah,
Maybe they are. Maybe there's an optional paper you can do. Focusing on architecture and principles of architectural systems. I mean, from memory, we didn't have that problem. It
yeah,
was you just wrote code. You just had to worry about maybe running that code even on a server. Yeah, it
yeah.
wasn't it. It was like, wow, yeah, you didn't
Yeah,
have to.
showing age a bit, but yeah, and
Yeah,
for the context of anyone listening, it's, when I there may very well be that in school it may have been in place for many a year, but when I went to school, I was learning off like massive A plus Network Plus books. So I remember sitting in like the bus from Hamilton to Huntley with these massive books, and that's literally how I read, was just
yeah,
these massive books. But like, it's come a long way now where books are
yeah.
actually, yeah.
Oh,
So
I know. I remember my MCSE books, the
mm,
package of four of them, and they weighed a ton. And you had one for Windows NT 2000 and one for I can't remember Windows NT 2000 Server, and one for SQL and one for AD, and well, good times.
yes, yes, but uh, so I think just going back to so we've got our junior engineer, we've got our experienced engineers. What about the step up, like a CTO, for example? You've alluded to it, and you've kind of told us that actually CTOs or management of an organization, for example, should be allowing time for engineers to get mentored, and senior engineers, and I'm just using the engineers a very generic term because it could be architects, could be, insert role here, but AI assisted future or present, like what would be the recommendations you would give to a CTO or a manager that might be going, or a training lead on like how to prepare teams for this, and at least that
It's a
next, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, from what I see, that you've got people in organizations who are naturally curious, who are going to go and start who are dabbling. They go home, after work and they go and start using these tools, and then they come back and they go, man, this is amazing, I can do all this stuff. And then that, they're sort of almost held back at work because, hey, we've got all the, our code base is, huge, and we have all these other requirements and governance and, standards, and we have to have this and this. And so I think, and then you've got the sort of people who sort of go, no, I really, there is an unpredictability when you introduce AI that I'm not ready for, because I know if you say to me, go and build this, here's a story,
Mm.
here's a story, go and build this feature, I know exactly how long it's going to take me. There is no, like I can, tell you it's going to take me a half a sprint to get this done, and I'm not going to let you down because there's not going to be any surprises. The You've got that sort of person who doesn't want to take the risk of introducing AI into their process, so they don't even touch it. They ignore it and they just go no, because it's not going to go and add any value to what I do. So you've got those two types of people, and
Yeah.
what you really need is you need the champs, the people who are really getting into it, to help and support the people who are going, no, keep it away from me. So you need to provide, I mean, as a CTO, you need to provide a real support for those champions, to teach everyone in the organization what they're learning, and also give everyone a way to share what works and what doesn't work. Because I mean, I have yet to find something that really doesn't work with AI. It all comes down to me just engineering the process, me providing the context engineering, me providing the good grounding and pointing it at the right docs, and it, often there is a solution, and you've got to get the people who are figuring stuff out for themselves in contact with the people who are not ready to use it, and get them together and start them learning off each other, build that culture of that really powerful culture of sort of learning and skilling and developing, because you cannot hide from this. It's not something you can say, oh, well, I'm not going to adopt it into my organization, because it's already here. You've got developers who are just using it. They're just copying and pasting stuff into ChatGPT.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's the reality. And you can block it. You can put a proxy in place. They'll use their phone, and then, just you got to roll with it. I think as a CTO though, the heart of the awesome thing is you are responsible for delivering, technical value to the company and innovation and all those sorts of things. You're now going to have these tools that allows your teams to be so much more productive, and allow them to stretch out. Like, you can see back-end developers now going, okay, I can actually do some of this front-end stuff. I'm not as, I'm full stack. I can learn this stuff. I can start to stretch my skills. I can become more an infrastructure, I can do more of the infrastructure as code. I can learn as I work. And I think the great CTOs are really just taking this and going, well, I'm going to use this as an amplifier, a natural amplifier. I'm going to spend some of this gains on delivering for the business. I'm going to spend some of the gains on building culture, and I'm going to spend some of the gains on dealing with all the things that I haven't dealt with over the
Mm.
last X number of years, tech debt, and all that sort of stuff. And we're going to work together as an organization to build robust processes to support this going forward in the future. So it's not just about we're going to spend that time to just do stuff for now. It's let's spend some of that time to think about how we develop ourselves as an organization going into the future. But it's definitely already in the organization. There's no organization that's not using AI. It's just they don't know about it.
Yeah, 100%. I like that. There's two things that came to my mind. Is one, your team, like you, essentially, you're talking about the J curve, right? So you've got the people that are always at the front of the curve that is miles ahead, and that's never changed. I think you always have teams that are there, pushing the boundaries, because you need people like that. But you also need people who are slightly behind, and I think there's different opportunities for and the reason I say that is because, like, if you're in product development as an example, or an operations team, coming from my own background, where, like, you've got someone that's always learning on the forefront of everything, want to try the latest thing, you still need those people to actually hang on a second. This thing needs to be reliable. This thing needs to be secure. We need to make sure that we do consider the users of this. It's not that they don't have value. It's just that their value is in a slightly different place. But it's about using the combination of both of those type of people, not necessarily everyone who hasn't adopted AI is out the window or out the door, because that's not the way.
Mm,
Like, there's definitely huge opportunities for multiple different types of
yeah.
personas here.
Yeah, the best cultures are the ones that have everyone includes, it brings everyone along on the journey. I think that's the culture. It's just often, as developers, you're just under so much pressure
Mm,
to deliver, and and you are, being a developer is a super stressful, difficult job. I think that's something we kind of forget about, and often the developers are seen as just they're just the builder. Just I mean, code monkey, go off you go, code monkey, go do the thing.
yeah.
Um, and I think the thing is, developers have so much more they can offer, and I think bringing a developer closer into the product, helping, making them, the best teams are the ones where they're actually part of what they're delivering. They're not just, here's a thing, here's a widget, go build it. They're, why are we building it? What are we building it for? And because they can start to use AI, they can start to ask questions about, why would I build it this? Why would a customer want this over this?
Mm,
They can start developing the sort of the human, the HC, the human-centered design or design thinking approaches. They can start to develop other skills outside of engineering that I use GitHub Copilot for a whole lot of stuff that's almost engineering adjacent, that's not even code writing. It's just me going, I have that critical thinking prompt. And one of the things I was asking it was, should I build a tool to do a certain thing?
yeah.
And
Okay.
I used that prompt, and it came back and said, well, hang on, why are you really doing this? And I won't go into the details, but it really made me think, well, actually, is there a better way? Should I build a product or a solution or a tool to do this, or should I just go and talk to the person over there and we do a solution? We come up with a change to the process
Mm,
rather than automating something. There's all of these skills that I'm now starting to develop and rethink because I'm using AI to just in different ways that it probably wasn't. GitHub Copilot's not intended to challenge my thinking, but it's so good at it. The models are so good at it. And of course, they're just a general LLM, right? Of course, they can do that. That's what they can do whatever we ask them to do, or try to do
yeah. Oh,
whatever we
yeah.
ask them to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think challenging developers to get outside the developer box is really critical as well, and develop other skills, T and E shaped skill sets.
Mm.
So that's more important than ever.
Yeah, we've touched a lot on coding this afternoon, specifically around generative AI and implications, but actually, yeah, we haven't touched a lot, and it's not really in scope of this sort of conversation, but we haven't touched, yeah, you a lot on actually the other sort of benefits of using those tools around, like, value-based delivery or portfolio management, or yeah, try thinking in terms of that critical thinking, or other ways to look at a problem, and being able to use them from a creative standpoint as well, of going,
Mm,
yeah, I do like the one about, should I build this tool, because that goes back to, do you buy it, do you build it, do you rent it, like,
yeah.
what are the steps, and where do you go, oh, no, we need something custom versus not custom. So it's definitely something I'll be taking away from this, is to actually try and use it to expand my thinking in terms of that area. So
Because yeah, LLMs are trained to answer accurately. A chat completion model is trained to respond to us by usually answering a question. But they're so good at giving us questions to ask ourselves, or to ask others or whatever to, I find that just sitting down before I do anything and saying what questions should I ask myself about this? I'm about to do X. What should I ask myself before I do that? How much is it going to cost? Do I want to do this? Do I have the time to do it? And yeah, I mean, the more I think about it, the more ways AI helps me just clear my thoughts, get some bullet points down of things that I might need to think of before I start a task. So great for agendas, meeting agendas.
Yes,
uh,
yes, yes. Um, that's awesome. I'm just wary of time
like,
and like just all the knowledge that you've shared with us today. So thank you very much for coming, having a chat, sharing your knowledge. Is there any last advice or recommendations on learning material that you'd recommend?
yeah, I mean, obviously, I think you mentioned earlier, the Learn Docs from Microsoft. There is a whole bunch of the Learn courses for GitHub Copilot. I think, of course, I've got my blog is your blog as well. So there's my blog, which is danielscott.raynsford.com, and then there's the video series I'm working on on YouTube, and Neuroflow Dev is my YouTube channel, where I try and share some of these prompts and approaches that I use. But I mean, I kind of recommend everyone write down what you're learning and use that as a sort of, even if it's not a blog or something, just write down the bullet points, because that then becomes something that you can then use later on as source material for what AI could say, this is what you could learn next on this journey. So um, there's there are so many great blog posts. There are so many great YouTube series. I follow a lot of the GitHub people as well.
Yep.
Um, and I think also it's always good to be wary of all the shiny things, because there is so much cool stuff happening, but not all of it is production grade. Not all of it is building software that you would necessarily put in front of customers.
Mm.
So I think being, uh, thinking carefully about what is the technology you need and why do you need it. Does it fit what you're actually trying to do? A lot of people do it, I think finding some people who are doing really interesting things, but really interesting things to go to production.
Yeah.
There's lots of great tech demos, so many amazing tech demos of I built this with AI. I think you need to find some of the people who are saying I built this with AI and it's now running in production, and I had 10 developers review it and we all work together on a team and we know it's production grade. That's the learner. That's the stuff that you want to really pay attention to.
Yeah, I like that. Mainly from the fact of a lot of preview features, as an example, are becoming a lot more public a lot earlier on in the life cycle, because stuff's moving so fast that actually, 5 years ago, the stuff that's in preview, you'd probably see maybe a year before it was released, if at all, because it would go straight into like prod because it's had so much internal developer testing. So yeah, I think it's a really good call out around, well, the use of these AI tools is great and they can help you, but just go back to the critical thinking of why, and making
Yeah,
sure
why?
that yeah, and making sure that it can be something that is usable. And just because it means it's not entirely usable today doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to be usable tomorrow. Or it's jot the notes down on why you can't use something, and who knows, in the next year it's something that you could use as as a mentor point with your mentee to go, oh, by the way, these are the things we considered. And yeah,
Yeah, totally.
thank you very much for coming
No,
and yeah, speaking today. But very,
thank you, Luke.
very good conversation. But
I'm sure
hopefully,
we could talk about this even longer, but
yeah, we might have to do a part two at some stage.
yeah,
But thank you
it's all
very
changing very
much.
quick.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool. Thank you.